Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss how the Conservatives seem to have shot down their second attempt at levelling up, and this time they've done so only a matter of days since their relaunch. It really does highlight one of the contradictory situations that the Conservative Party finds itself in, and the public had best beware. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, a couple of weeks ago, Michael Gove, who's been disappearing and reappearing like the Cheshire Cat, popped up once again to reveal his published plans for levelling up. It was roundly panned as being a directory of already announced plans and budget cutbacks compared to 2019 promises, but it represented Boris Johnson attempting to relaunch his premiership. The other thing that's emerged from this is because of all those budgetary cutbacks since, the situation is now when Boris Johnson starts boasting of the money he's going to be spending on levelling up in the north of England, as has recently been verified, the north of England are going to get less money from this levelling up plan than they did from EU development funds. But there you go. So Michael Gove just been given a speech in Liverpool last week where he said that levelling up would be the central mission of our times. But at the weekend, it was reported that new Chief of Staff Stephen Barclay was promising to restore the small estate. Well, these two things are mutually exclusive. And this was always going to be the problem for the Conservatives at the next election. I mean, this week Boris Johnson's apparently going around the UK selling this levelling up agenda. Does he not realise his Chief of Staff has announced at the weekend that it's been canned? The thing is, for Conservatives, usually promising a small estate's an easy sell for them because it appeals to their core voters in the south who never actually have it inflicted upon them. They never see the harm in a small estate because it doesn't actually affect them. It hurts the other parts of the UK that don't really vote Conservative anyway. Only in 2019 they did. And not only did in significant numbers in the north of England particularly, but the Tories have their majority on the strength of these votes. If the so-called red wall seats, these are the seats in the north of England that are traditionally Labour but flipped Conservative, if they revert back to Labour, it's not just that the Tories' majority would be diminished. It's not that conning northern constituencies to vote Conservative against their interests gave them a larger majority. You know, without them, they'd have no majority at all. They'd have lost the last election. And Brexit wouldn't have happened. But the main post-Brexit appeal to these voters was levelling up. Boris Johnson promised a redistribution of wealth around the country, at least around England. The Conservatives jettisoned their one nation Tory brethren in favour of the English nationalists, hence our likely path to oblivion as a union before too long, if things carry on as they are. And this electoral strategy in 2019 was purely practical, entirely practical. It wasn't ideological. The Conservatives knew they couldn't get any return for an investment of policies in Scotland, so they didn't even try, didn't bother. Their Brexit con trick had worked in the industrial north, who were promised an easier time exporting around the world if they left the EU. They were promised more and better jobs, as well as lower living costs. What they've been getting and what they will continue to get is the reverse on all fronts. But the Conservatives cannot abandon the red wall seats now that they have their Brexit, because for some that's enough. For some of them, it's these northern monkeys. They've been useful. Great. We've got our Brexit now. That's it. Can't rejoin now for goodness knows how long. Completely impossible. In fact, I may be doing a video on that later today. We'll see about the schedule. You know, for those who still want to win the next election, though, they have to retain those seats. Have to. The thing about Brexit is that it worked across England mainly on nationalistic lines. But it worked especially well in the north because communities there had been left behind, as Johnson put it. It's just like Donald Trump pointed out, how politics had failed ordinary Americans. So Johnson was saying the same thing. They spoke the truth without mentioning that they would represent a far worse threat than the political establishment that had been failing these people for so many years. And it worked. Poorer communities voted Brexit because even if they weren't really sure that it would definitely be better, it's not like they were all convinced it would definitely be better. But they were sure that it couldn't be worse. They really believed themselves to be in a situation where things couldn't get worse. How's 2022 going? But Brexit has made things worse. But they still want to see their lives improving. See, that's what they were promised, and the Tories had better deliver. But delivering means one of two things. The first and ideal solution is that you grow the economy so that all communities benefit from stronger exports, do indeed get more and better paid jobs. You try and maybe encourage more of those new startups to locate in the north when new businesses establish. You try and encourage more of them to move around the country. But the problem is that despite what some people's ideology will suggest, Brexit simply does not allow us to supercharge our economy, as the Brexit press would put it. All Brexit has done, and all it's promising to do, is make it easier for foreign businesses to sell in the British market, as I was describing yesterday with Jacob Rees-Mogg's latest brain fart. And even if the economy did grow strongly, even if it just happened to grow strongly, currently the benefits would not really be seen in the north without major government intervention. We are not seeing that intervention. We're not even seeing a plan for that intervention, because all the plans that have been released have had severe budgetary cuts when it comes to the north of England. The second way in which you can level up the north, so let's say you can't stimulate strong economic growth. It's not happening. You face up to that fact, right, but we still want to level up the north. So what do? Well, you're going to have to redistribute opportunities. If you cannot grow your resources, then you have to redistribute those resources. But that means that as you increase opportunities in the north, you are diminishing them in the south. But that's where their heartlands are. That's their core support. Those southern Conservatives will not enjoy that, nor do they want to see taxes increasing to pay for this levelling up project in the north of England. Because that's the other thing. If you can't grow the economy and you need a load of money and you can't just take it away from the south, what do? You have to put taxes up. And this dilemma is played out in Parliament as well. If Boris Johnson doesn't make good on his promise to level up, the red wall Tories will rebel against him, just as their voters will at the next election. If he does make good on his promise, or even make some genuine efforts in that direction, then the southern Tories will rebel, as will their voters at the next election. Because remember, these southern voters, if you two ways to deliver levelling up in the north, if we accept that they're not going to grow the economy, because they're not. One, you raise taxes, or two, you take resources from the south, or some combination of the two. They don't want that. They'll rebel against that. Right now, you can see this battle playing out. You have the red wall Tories who do not mind tax increases if they accept that that's the only way to get levelling up, but they want to see the cement trucks rolling into their backyard and shovels in the ground. Then you have the southern Tories concerned about the rising cost of living, and they want taxes dropping pronto. They don't care about levelling up because their constituencies were the beneficiaries of a tilted national playing field of opportunities anyway. They don't really stand to gain from this policy. After 2 years since the election, there was already no sign of a levelling up programme in operation. It was all talk and nothing actually happening. All there was announcements of funding cuts for transport, especially, like I said, in the north of England. Gove's paper was an attempt to restart the levelling up agenda, or at least pretend to. But that's the thing. It's not possible for either Boris Johnson or any successor that may take over to keep all the promises and please both red wall Tories and the more traditional MPs. He either pushes ahead with his levelling up agenda, but with poor economic growth that means taxes, or he cuts back on public spending and goes along the path of the small state, as Barclay referred to. But they can't do both. But they also can't sacrifice the support of either northern or southern Tory voters at the next election if they are to win. So logic dictates that they would have to lie to at least one group. Now, we know they're not above lying, so which is the easiest group to lie to? Can they lie to their southern support base that, we're spending a lot at the moment, and yes, we're not spending it near you, but the good times are going to roll in the future, even though taxes are going to be quite high at the time? Or do they drop taxes just before the election, promising that the spending is now done, but that might raise suspicions up north, only to raise taxes again after the election? Will they fall for it? Or is it easier to lie to the red wall that although results are not being delivered, that they are being delivered, it's just you thick northern monkeys can't see it because it takes time. And in many ways, people will accept that something like this will take time. They do accept that it will take time. But here's the other issue. In the south, most of these voters in their heartlands, which is not all of the south, but in their heartlands, generally revert to voting Conservative. Sometimes, if they really don't like the Conservative government, they'll hold their nose and vote Conservative rather than Labour. In the North, that's not the case. So the ones in the North, if you don't really convince them, if you're not effective with your deception, their default position is to vote Labour. The Conservatives have only borrowed their votes in 2019. So that's the problem. Or is there another way? See, because although Johnson seems to want to deliver his levelling up promises, though without actually putting any effort into achieving it, his Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, has been blocking a lot of the funding necessary for it. But won't this mean that the Conservatives probably lose the next election? Because if they cannot convince those red wall voters that they're going to keep their promise, they will just revert back to Labour. So will the Conservatives lose? Maybe. But the question is, how many care? Sounds an odd question, because it is often said the problem we have, the reason we have so many Conservative governments, there's any number of reasons, but one of them is because the Conservatives want to win too much and Labour not enough. But the Conservatives are a confusing bunch. For example, their full title is the Conservative and Unionist Party. Many describe themselves as One Nation Tories, despite their flagship policy for the past 6 years being something that tears the UK apart. But from a practical point of view, being entirely pragmatic, it would help the Conservatives win power more often, maybe even permanently, if the UK split up. In fact, there's every chance that we would be a real one-party state for the foreseeable future if Scotland, Northern and even Wales all left. The reason is, so you win power, the sort of power they have, 100% of the power, by winning a majority of seats. The Conservatives win no seats in Northern Ireland, of course, very few seats in Scotland, proportionally more, I suppose, in Wales, but still a very long way off a majority in Wales. So they are in the minority in Northern Ireland, very much so, because they have none, Wales and Scotland. So ideologically, they are pro-UK. But a pragmatic Tory would be anti-UK, albeit secretly. Same thing with levelling up in the next election. There could be an argument for trying to win the next election, but not necessarily be all that bothered if you lose. Not consider it a disaster. Let Labour come in with their minority government, because that's what it would be, fart about for a few years trying to fix the crumbling infrastructure with the knackered economy bequeathed to them by over a decade of Tory rule. The media will blame them for poor living standards, even though it's just a continuation of what was left over from Tory policies. There's likely to be argy-bargy between different parties because Labour are not going to win a working majority, and so they'll have to barter to get legislation through as well. That'll slow things down. That'll slow reform down. Then, at the next election, dissatisfaction, the usual thing, oh, you made all these grand promises and our lives have hardly improved at all. And, you blame it on the hung parliament. The media say, well, this is the problem. You see, Labour can't win a majority. Only the Conservatives can win a majority. You need a strong government to drive reforms through. Tories come straight back into power. And another decade, maybe 2 decades of selling off more of our national assets to their mates and blaming the cost to the public on Labour. Like David Cameron and George Osborne did. Or maybe someone like Rishi Sunak thinks he can abandon the red wall and pick up seats to compensate elsewhere. Bear in mind, David Cameron won a majority in 2015 without those red wall seats. Maybe Rishi Sunak thinks he can do the same. But with Stephen Barclay making this statement about committing to the small state, going on the path to the small state, and being in charge now of the civil service, officials and staff basically in Downing Street, and also running the Cabinet Office, he is a major player in government policy now. And with both him and the Chancellor against levelling up spending, it means that right now those who seem to be willing to sacrifice the red wall are in the ascendancy. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. If you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.